Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. Grab yourself a cup of tea and let's talk some boxing. Now, there are a few things. There is Dillian Whyte and there is AJ. AJ is obviously going to be fighting Alexander Usyk. And interestingly enough, the WBO seem to be lining up the next one to become mandatory after Usyk, and that seems to be Joyce. And going on to Dillian Whyte, he will likely be fighting on Canelo's undercard. And obviously that will be the undercard of Canelo versus Caleb Plant, which will be an undisputed fight. So that's a big event for Dillian Whyte to get on, and I would imagine he would be chief support. It seems it will be Jermaine Franklin. Now, the interesting thing about the dynamic of the heavyweight division at the moment is there is Wilder Fury, and that's going on in the background because I don't think that's a huge fight anymore. I don't think it's one that fans are really captivated by. We want to see different things. We want to see the best fight the best and different fights happening, not the same one time and time again, especially when they have been conclusive in the past, like the second one. I mean, it doesn't get any more conclusive than that. That being said, Dillian Whyte is WBC Interim World Champion, so what that does mean is he cannot be ranked by another governing body. And I think that gives the WBC a little bit too much leverage on Dillian Whyte, because that means that they can realistically say, okay, you gotta wait because obviously we want to do Wilder versus Fury 3. They've actually said that. That is what they are focused on. Before it was moved to a later date, they said what we are focused on is this trilogy fight, and nothing extends beyond that at the moment. Now that's unusual for a governing body to say that, because usually they will be lining up a mandatory if there is one to come after that contest. Which again, you would fully expect that to happen given Dillian Whyte's situation, being WBC Interim World Champion, staying loyal to that governing body, taking challenge after challenge. Normally what would happen in this current situation is Tyson Fury would be made champion in recess, Dillian Whyte would be ordered to face Deontay Wilder. Now, I guess that is made even more difficult because of the agreement between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder. So there would need to be negotiations between Deontay Wilder, Tyson Fury and Dillian Whyte along with the WBC to get something like that done. Because if Dillian Whyte was going to fight Deontay Wilder and be upgraded to champion, Deontay Wilder would have to sort things out with Tyson Fury, because Wilder has that option on Tyson Fury. That's the reason why this situation is happening. That is the reason why the trilogy is going ahead, because Deontay Wilder had that rematch clause and tried to activate it last year. And it's just a shame that it has taken this long for it to actually happen. But that being said, Wilder fights Fury. The contract is between them. The WBC is on the line, but they shouldn't be rolled in to that kind of deal. So if they were going to do that, they would have to eliminate probably Deontay Wilder as well, because if Wilder wants to fight Fury, which is obviously the contract he has, then he would have to then say, okay, I'm not fighting Fury, and choose to face Dillian Whyte for the WBC title, and then he would no longer have that option on Tyson Fury. So there would need to be some negotiations had there, and the WBC seem to be more interested in just doing the trilogy, then they can move on after that. So it is possible that Dillian Whyte is called as mandatory next year. That can happen, but that depends on what happens with Undisputed and if they try to make that one next year. Because it's a unification, it will trump a mandatory. So Dillian Whyte could be left waiting until late 2022 to get his world title opportunity, which would be unfortunate because Joyce seems to be getting himself into a mandatory slot, and he hasn't been waiting as long as Dillian Whyte. That's the kind of thing that's going on. Dillian Whyte is being held up by his current position, and he cannot be ranked by another governing body, so that does make things a little bit more difficult. If he wants to move away and try and get a chance with a different governing body, he would have to vacate the WBC interim title, and that is a big decision for him to make. If Dillian Whyte wasn't interim champion, I believe that he would be in the position of Joyce, because he was ranked number 1 before Usyk moved up to heavyweight. Usyk was obviously a holder of the WBO belt in the cruiserweight division. Now the rules in the WBO state that if a champion from a lower weight class moves up, they automatically become mandatory to the champion at their new weight class. That happened when Usyk moved up, and Dillian Whyte was number 1, but that meant he was behind Usyk when it came to who gets their opportunity. I mean, if he was still in that position, if he wasn't interim champion with the WBC, I would imagine he'd be in the position of Joyce, and maybe he would be the next mandatory. It will be interesting to see who gets their world title opportunity first, Joyce or Dillian Whyte. Especially when you consider they are on different routes. Joyce is going further towards AJ, and Dillian Whyte is going further towards Tyson Fury. I do believe that Dillian Whyte would want to go into a rematch with AJ as a champion. Then he has a little bit more leeway, because there were negotiations between those two to stage a fight in 2019, and that was likely for around April, I believe. Now, Dillian Whyte didn't believe he had enough time to prepare. He would have 8 or 9 weeks in a camp to prepare for this world title opportunity. Also, he wasn't really happy with the rematch situation because he was number 1 in the WBO at that point, and he was hoping to become mandatory, then fight AJ, believing he would win. Then he could go to AJ and say, "This is what you get in the rematch. There is no rematch clause." So the salt and pepper is on Dillian Whyte's side of the table in negotiations for that rematch, for the third fight between those two, if that were to happen. So what Dillian Whyte was doing was betting on himself and didn't choose to take that fight with AJ. Then he really did commit to going the WBC route, especially after Usyk moved up and then was called as mandatory ahead of him. He did double down on going that WBC route so that he could perhaps become champion, then have more leeway going into that rematch with Anthony Joshua. Nevertheless, Usyk is fighting AJ next. Joyce looks to be lined up next as a mandatory after him, and Dillian Whyte is still left waiting for his world title opportunity. He will be fighting Jermaine Franklin, it seems, and it seems it will happen on the Canelo vs Caleb Plant undercard. So it is a good card for him to get out on in America. Then perhaps he does come back to the UK, although it does seem like they are planning for Dillian Whyte to have his fight after that in America also. Then, maybe next year, he gets that long-awaited world title opportunity, and Anthony Joshua is in the position of looking at more mandatories. That is the problem with him being a unified champion, holding various different versions of the world championship. There are going to be mandatories, and that makes it difficult for him to have voluntaries and, say, make a big undisputed fight. I mean, he was asking for an exception from Alexander Usyk to try and make Fury last time. Next time around, is there going to be a mandatory standing in the way? Could be Dillian Whyte for Tyson Fury, but there is just one for Fury, whereas for AJ, there are mandatories coming left, right and centre, which does make it difficult for him to make voluntary fights. Anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a like and grab that subscribe button. Thanks guys.